Hello and welcome back to the Trinity Student Managed Fund podcast with me, Emanuele Roncalli di Montorio-Veronese, where I speak with leaders in the world of business, finance and technology to give our students a better insight into the careers we may wish to pursue. Today's episode is sponsored by Setanta Asset Management, a Dublin-based boutique investment manager specialising in equity and multi-asset strategies with a fundamental value approach since 1998. With a proven track record of strong performance and 13.2 billion euros in active assets under management, Setanta serves a diverse client base, including institutional insurance, pension funds, charities and family offices across Ireland, Germany, Canada and the United States, applying a long-term investment philosophy that clients value. Today, I'm excited to sit down with Graham Ambrose, also known as G-Dog. He is a multifaceted professional with a career spanning finance, fitness, and the arts. As managing director at Goldman Sachs, he specializes in equities, serving institutional clients globally with prior roles at other firms in London, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Beyond finance, Graham co-hosts Lift for Life with Graham and Angus, a weekly podcast sharing his fitness journey, including nutrition, weight training, and interviews, combining inspiration with practical advice. A passionate advocate for the arts, he serves as a board member and trustee for Just Us Dance Theatre and East London Dance, supporting young artists, community engagement and international collaborations. Additionally, Graham mentors Joseph Toonga, the founder of Just Us Dance Theatre, in addition to being the Royal Ballet's emerging choreographer, fostering impactful connections between business and the arts. I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Graham Ambrose. So, Graham Ambrose, aka G-Dog, welcome to the Trinity Student Managed Fund podcast.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. And thank you for coming all the way to London to do this.
Thank you for taking the time. So, look, I think you have a really interesting background. So I think this is going to be a really interesting episode. I'd love to talk about your career and all the different things you're doing outside of work, from hip hop to mentorship to, obviously the Lift for Life podcast. But I suppose, could we start maybe with our listeners would have heard the introduction. But could we get an introduction from you and then sort of how you met Angus and made the podcast, the Lift for Life podcast?
Sure. So I'm obviously a managing director at Goldman Sachs at the moment. I've been at Goldman for 25 years. And I've been doing weight training most of my life very ineffectively, most of my life, since the age of maybe 24. And not seeing significant results, but feeling healthy as a result of it. Running once, twice a week, etc. Then about 7 years ago, I decided I needed to get a personal trainer in the area where I live in West London. And so I searched on Instagram for personal trainers, West London, got a list of about 6 or 7 of them and just started following them to see which one I might get on with. And I zeroed in on Angus Warburton. Thought I'm probably going to get on with this guy. And here we are, 7 years later, clearly I did. And he did something in my training which is totally different to any other personal trainer that I've had. And that was, on the first meeting, he asked me what I was eating on a daily basis and to keep a diary of my macros and my general food consumption each day. And that was totally different to any personal trainer. Normally, I expect to go in and they want to test my 1 rep max or get me running on a treadmill. So he did something completely different to anybody else. And then the journey started and it's got better and better and better over the 7 years. And I've physically changed a lot. I've mentally changed a lot. We've got an amazing relationship now. We're best mates, which is ironic given that he's 26 and I'm 55. So it was quite an extraordinary sort of symbiosis of different ages. And we decided that it would be really fun to launch a podcast to describe our journey, my journey specifically, and what I've achieved in weight training, how I've balanced it with my work, and what he's also learned from it as well. Because I think intergenerational relationships are really quite fascinating.
And this is something you asked Stephen Hoops in your most recent episode, or your recent episode. But kind of if you could name a couple of 2-3 aspects that you've learned now, 7 years later, which you wish you knew 7 years prior, what would they be, would you say?
There are so many. I think one of the biggest is that you can't reverse the aging process. And I've realized absolutely you can. And I go for Bupa health checks every year, and I have data to show that I have physically reversed the aging process in my body. It shows my cardiovascular fitness, it shows my muscle mass, it shows my bloods. All of them are 10 to 20 years younger than my current actual age as a result of the weight training and my fitness journey over the past 7 years. It's total transformation. But I think even more important than that is the impact it's had on my mentality. And I never understood how being physically stronger can make you feel more self-confident, mentally stronger. It can improve your interpersonal relationships with other people. And perhaps most surprisingly, it can reinforce an idea of delayed gratification, which is so important in everybody's life. And I think for any of your audience who are just leaving university or are at university, who may want to really accelerate in their career right at the beginning, to have a sense of delayed gratification is very, very important. And I see that in my work with the interns and with the new grads, that they all want to achieve everything really fast. And that's great. It's good to have ambition and enthusiasm. But delaying the gratification can make you better at your job and also just make you understand life better.
Well, on the age part you mentioned that, I'm not one for flattery, but I just met you now and I was shocked. I was like, okay, you look a lot younger, because you revealed your age just on the episode. I think it was the 7th. So, I mean, it clearly is working. And I would like to, you talk a lot about, on the podcast, you debunk a lot of myths. And I know a lot of people at Trinity now, like they're doing, like everyone it seems is focusing on running, and everyone is doing half marathons. I did one myself just the other week. I kind of fell into it, but I know you have a very strong and well-researched view on running. So I'd love to maybe start with that. Could we talk about, why is weightlifting and strength training so important? And could you give all the Trinity people that are going, fanatic over running some advice here?
Well, I think it's very important to have a combination. So if you look at what I think is the best book that I've read about weight training, fitness, and everything, it's Peter Attia's book called Outlive. And that emphasizes the importance of combining cardiovascular fitness with physical strength. And the two things go very much hand in hand for longevity, but you need to think about this in your 20s rather than in your 50s. I wish I'd learnt what I know now when I was in my 20s. So even though I may be 55 years old, I think what I'm saying has a lot of relevance for people in their 20s. Weight training is a progression, and you, like investing, are compounding gains. So if you start weight training early in life, you're building a residue of muscle mass, which is going to be there later in life, and you're creating muscle memory, which is going to help you to grow muscle later. And later in life, you're less likely to get osteoporosis or something called sarcopenia, is when your muscles basically just diminish. You see it in your parents maybe when they physically shrink as they get older, your grandparents. And that is basically just muscle mass reducing because of lack of use. And that is also related to running as well. So by definition, if you want to be a marathon runner, then your body will want to reduce your body weight to make you faster. If you look at 100-meter runners, they're physically bulkier. If you look at marathon runners, they're much, much thinner. And that is because their body has adapted. It's basically said, we need to run for long distances. We need to be as light as possible. The heaviest part of your body is your muscle mass. And your muscle mass is metabolically active tissue. And so it will reduce that metabolically active tissue. You need muscle to move your body, of course, but you don't need the volumes of it that you would if you want to live longer and have a strong, healthy body into your 80s. So the more you run and just run, the more risky it will be as you get older that your muscle mass will not be able to rebuild. You will face osteoporosis, sarcopenia. A lot of runners obviously get injuries. We did one podcast episode on some of the long distance runners in Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, and so on. And many of them have had to stop running because of injuries and just repeated stress injuries on their bones and their bodies. So combining running with weight training is a great thing to do. I've just entered the High Rocks competition in Manchester in January next year. And so I've had to increase my running significantly. And to bear in mind, I used to run a lot. I used to run a 10K every Sunday and a 5K maybe once or twice a week. And I didn't like the way my body looked. But now I look in the mirror and I see someone that's much more jacked than I've ever been in my entire life because I'm weight training. But I need to increase my running for this High Rocks. And I've realized to prevent injuries, I can combine more strength training. So I do calf strengthening exercises in a Smith machine, under a Smith machine in the gym. So that's where you've got the bar above across your shoulders with weights. And then I'll put either 2 weight plates on the floor, or I'll put a box, a very low box. And so my ankles will go down and then up, and to stretch my calves. And my physio has encouraged me to do that. My physio is a specialist in long distance running, and he's encouraged me to do this. And so that is weight training to boost your running. So the two things go absolutely hand in hand.
And I suppose, like, for university students, because I think one reason why people do a lot of running is because, as you mentioned on the podcast, Angus, it's just such an easy exercise. You just go out and run. I mean, for say university students that don't have maybe access to a personal trainer, I mean, what would your advice be to start incorporating like more strength and weight training now?
So I would say, and I've been to Dublin on business trips. There's some amazing gyms in Dublin. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And many of them got very, very cheap day passes that I've used on business trips.
Top recommendations?
Ooh, God, I can't remember the names. But yeah, there's a lot of them all over the place. And maybe just getting one session with a personal trainer just to learn how to do some of the weights. One session, 1 hour, say, teach me the correct form for back squat. Teach me the correct form for a bench press. Teach me the correct form for an overhead press. A lot of compound movements. And maybe that session cost you £40, £50. How much are you going to spend going out for drinks? So you just think about, you forego maybe 1 or 2 nights out in order to fix your form, and then you can start going to the gym. So you don't need to have a personal trainer for a long period of time. I think you just need one session to get the basics and to understand it for 1 hour, and that will prevent injury. A lot of the myths about weight training are that it injures you, that it can be dangerous. They don't talk about this as much with running. Running can be equally dangerous, but weight training is only dangerous if you do it wrong. If you lift weights that are too heavy for you, or your form is bad. If you've got the correct form and you're lifting the right weights progressively increasing as your body is adapting, then it's fantastic and it will work. But you just got to get the basics right. You can also obviously look on YouTube. And I mean, Angus, just like every other personal trainer these days, has got an online business as well. Angus has got clients in Buenos Aires, bizarrely in Bangladesh. I mean, Instagram goes everywhere these days. So these online personal trainers offer very, very cheap packages, very affordable packages globally.
It's an investment.
Yeah.
And I suppose, could we actually talk about your career at Goldman? Because, as you said, you've been there over 20 years, 25 years. And we were just talking about you've worked in Hong Kong and Singapore, at other firms as well. I'd love to know, like, why, what makes Goldman Sachs so unique as a place to work. And then, I'd love to kind of go deeper into like your work routine and how you manage everything.
Sure. So I've worked in 3 firms, a Japanese firm, a British firm that suddenly became Dutch after having a bit of a problem in the 1990s. And I also worked in Goldman for 25 years. So I've experienced 3 different cultures, Japanese, European, and American. However, Goldman is not just an American culture. It's a very, very unique culture. And that is one of collaboration and partnership, almost in a club-style setting. You feel like you've joined a club when you join Goldman Sachs. I think that's what differentiates it from all other financial firms. It's one global entity where everyone collaborates together. There's a constant feeling that everyone you work with is there to help you, and you're there to help them, and it's symbiotic.
And in terms of kind of your routine, I mean, I'd love to know kind of wake up to, end of day, what are you eating? Where are you putting in your workouts? I'd love to know what that looks like. Obviously at a managing director level, but even like earlier, over the past few years, how's that developed?
So I suppose I'm now 55, so I've been effectively working for 34 years, I suppose. And my working hours have been roughly the same for those 34 years. Maybe the difference is I now have the ability to work from home sometimes. So whereas in the 1990s, I would go into the office on a Sunday lunchtime and then work all afternoon and then go home maybe 7 in the evening and then start the work week in the office. Now I can do that from home on a weekend, so I can work from home. And obviously the culture these days is be in the office all the time. However, if you've got a plumber arriving or you've got a family commitment, then of course you can work from home to deal with that. So it's a very, very flexible system. But on an average day, my alarm goes off at 5:15. Now I'm sponsored for the podcast with Fresh Fitness Food. So they will bizarrely deliver my breakfast and lunch, macro calculated and balanced with all of the nutrients written on it, on a muscle building package on my doorstep. I put that into a cab and I'm in the office for maybe 6:45. I have my first morning meeting, which is at 7:15. And that is a combination of our Asian offices and my team in London. So we could have people from Sydney, Shanghai, Singapore, Tokyo, Mumbai on a Zoom call, talking about macroeconomics, economic strategy, stock market strategy, or single stocks or sectors. So what's happening in artificial intelligence in Taiwan Semiconductor, what are the latest developments for the oil industry in China, what are the latest developments for fiscal stimulus in China, that sort of thing. And that will last until maybe 7:45, 8 o'clock. Then it's basically client time. So it's either client meetings, client phone calls, client emails, and then some internal meetings on how we manage our relationships with those clients, or obviously team management things, or internal collaboration. So we'll have an internal meeting with all of the offices to discuss a particular topic or a particular client. And that will carry on till lunchtime. And I could be in the office, out of the office, visiting a client's office, taking a colleague to see a client, etc. And then depending on the day, and I normally plan this on a Sunday afternoon, I will go to the gym either at lunchtime or after work in the evening at about 6:30. So normally by the time it gets to Sunday, I'm able to know which work meetings are fixed during the week that can't be moved, and where I have a lunchtime where there's nothing happening. So in the olden days, I would sit at my desk, have my lunch at my desk, or go down to the office canteen, or go out to Pret. But now I go down to the gym. When I'm in the gym, I might read a bit of research. I might read the newspaper. I might catch up on like the Nikkei or the Financial Times between my sets, so I can multitask in the gym. My gym sessions are normally about an hour. And then I go back to my desk, afternoon, same sort of structure as the morning, and then I'll leave the office, I guess, around 6:30-ish, something like that. And then if I haven't been to the gym at lunchtime, because I could have had a client lunchtime meeting or something, then I'll go to the gym in the evening. But every day, with very few exceptions, I will go to the gym either at lunchtime or the evening during the week.
Okay, wow. And so that you mentioned Sunday there, that Sunday afternoon, is that kind of your, like, how important is that for, setting up your week? Is that your kind of...
Critical, absolutely critical. And I think almost all of my colleagues, it's if you log on to a Goldman Sachs computer on a Sunday and email more or less anybody, there'll be a response within 10 minutes. It's like the entire world seems to be online on Sunday afternoon preparing for the week. So Sunday afternoon is quite important in terms of structuring it. I can't stand arriving at my desk on Monday morning and just be hit by something unexpected. And so if I've absorbed what I did during the previous week. I have a management meeting normally at around 11:45, 12 o'clock on Monday. And so preparing for that management meeting on Sunday, because you never know what's going to happen on Monday morning, so you always got to be prepared, is a really important thing to do.
I think that needs to be more of a thing, reading in the gym. I mean, that's not super common, though, with a research report.
No, it's on your phone. I mean, everything's on your phone these days, right? So you'll be between sets. And I think a lot of people don't understand, and Stefan Hoops referred this on the podcast, the chief executive of DWS, where he is able to train first thing in the morning. He's structured his day where he trains in the morning and can't train during the day. So we all have different routines depending on our schedules. But on your phone these days, I've got a Goldman Sachs app, which has everything Goldman Sachs has published in the entire world. So I can just log on to it. I've got subscriptions to the South China Morning Post, the Nikkei, the Financial Times, all on my phone, so I can read those. And so I'll do maybe 6 reps, 4 sets, bench press, and then between each set, I've got a 2-minute gap where I'm sitting there waiting for my muscles to recover. And there, I can read the phone read the paper on my phone.
So it goes back to that idea of optimization and
Exactly.
everything. And I suppose, could we also talk about just nutrition? I know you have your sponsor now, and that's all sorted. But maybe before, even now, how could nutrition is a really important topic on the podcast. How can we eat better as university students, especially when we're studying in the library, but also when you're starting your first job? What I know there's the obvious, just not always going to the quick burrito place or burger place. Are there any kind of tips or advice you'd give to university students?
Yeah, I made so many mistakes with nutrition in my 20s, where you'd go out with your friends. I mean, I'd have the same sort of hours, right? I'd be getting up at 5:15 in the morning. I'd be finishing work at 6:30 or even later when I was in Singapore. Then going out with friends, sometimes getting home at 1 in the morning. So you're only having 4 hours sleep. And then everything is wrong with your body. I wasn't going to the gym then. And maybe I play squash in the evening sometimes or go for a run. And you go for a McDonald's breakfast. It's just a disaster. And so you're stuffing yourself with very high calorie, very low macronutrients because, okay, your burger's got some protein in it, but it's not ideal in terms of the macros in that McDonald's breakfast. And then it just affects your entire mentality during the day. And because you're tired, you're more likely to snack. Because you're not going to the gym, your body's feeling lethargic. It just becomes a vicious downward spiral of everything going wrong. So when you understand how to optimize what you're eating and you're thinking, I focus now on my protein intake and build everything around that. So I say, okay, I've got to have, I think, 200 grams of protein per day. And when you think of a chicken breast, maybe 30 grams of protein, it's like, wow, how do you do that? Well, for a start, you make sure you have protein in your breakfast. So a lot of people, I think, will have muesli or breakfast cereal or something without protein in the breakfast. And I think that is putting you on a losing trajectory for the rest of the day, because how can I possibly get 200 grams of protein if I'm hardly having anything in the first meal? So I'll make sure my first meal, and that happens with Fresh Fitness food, has got lots of eggs or salmon or something like that in it that's got protein content. And I find that, well, I don't just find, it's medically proven that protein satiates you more than anything else. So you're less likely to snack during the day if you started with a high protein breakfast.
And then sort of on the drink side of things, I mean, a lot of people I'm seeing are drinking, the Monsters Energy, the Red Bulls. I love espresso. I'm an Italian guy. I mean, what's your view on like getting energy drinks and, just generally?
Energy drinks generally, pretty stupid idea. Very, very sugary. Espresso, phenomenal. I mean, espresso, read Tim Spector, right? And everything that Tim Spector has said about the gut microbiome. Coffee is natural. Coffee is helps your body. It's an anti-cancer drug. It is, particularly if you don't have it with milk, then it's even more valuable for your body. It does act as a stimulant. I think Tim Spector says that people should be prescribed coffee. I think it's a really phenomenal thing to have, but just don't have it in excessive volume. So I have maybe 3 double espressos per day. But I do have a bit of milk in, so it's more like a macchiato. But bear in mind the calorie intake. So I used to have cappuccinos, and that, I know it sounds ridiculous to say, but it's very dangerous because the calories in the cappuccino can really add up because of the milk. And don't underestimate the impact of having like 5 cappuccinos a day, the amount of calories you're consuming by doing that. You can mess up your entire fitness weight loss journey by just filling yourself up with too much milk. And that is an easy fix, just to change that into an Americano with milk or change it to an espresso, et cetera, et cetera. But these Red Bulls and so on, just look at the calorie content in them, and I think you'd be amazed how many calories, because they've got so much sugar in them.
I mean, in Italy we have a rule with cappuccinos, like not after 11, because it's like a meal in itself because it's so big.
Well, you see people going to Starbucks and they say they're having a drink, but you look at it and it's actually a dessert because it's got like foam and it's got cream on it and it's got like hundreds and thousands on it. It's got an extra shot of vanilla essence, and it's probably got, I don't know, 300 calories in a drink.
It's a meal.
Yeah, totally.
And you mentioned there you used to play squash. I'd love to know. Like I was interning here over last summer, and I heard everyone is playing like paddle now. I know a lot of people love golf, and there's so many other sports. I mean, I'd love to know kind of what other sports do you enjoy? Maybe you've not mentioned on the podcast that you do, or you've tried and you've not liked.
I think for me, the fact that I'm doing so much weight training now, and obviously a bit of running with the High Rocks, is interesting because when I was at school, I was not sporty at all. I didn't play rugby. Well, we were forced to play rugby. We were forced to play cricket, etc. But I wasn't sporty. I wasn't particularly good in athletics. So I've really discovered my body in the past 15 years. And it's been phenomenal. And I sort of wish I discovered it earlier, because it would be much easier to get the gains now, etc., etc. My muscle memory would be better. But the only thing that I did regularly was squash and tennis. And I did that from my 20s onwards, and skiing, of course. And the problem with that is that I've had multiple anterior cruciate ligament injuries, ACL injuries, in my left knee and my right knee, but the left knee's got so bad that my ACL is now totally snapped in two. And I chose never to have a reconstruction. So that's quite interesting that I'm barbell back squatting 140 kilos, and yet I've got no anterior cruciate ligament in my left knee, right? And I'm not using a leg brace, and I'm not using some belt around my waist or anything. But I've progressively overloaded my body and my muscles over time so that my muscles in my quads, around my knee and in my calves compensate for the lack of the ACL muscle. And I spoke to a surgeon about this 10, 15 years ago, and I said to him, what do you think about me having a full ACL reconstruction? And he said, Graham, given your work schedule, you're going to have to commit yourself to very significant rehab. And I'm questioning whether you're going to be able to do that given the work that you're doing, because you're going to be spending at least an hour a day on your knee rehab if you do this reconstruction. And I see people in my gym now with the same thing, doing all this rehab. And he said, if you don't do the rehab, your knee is not necessarily going to be any better than if you just, hadn't had the operation. So I was thinking, this is not ideal, because I really don't think I'm going to have time to do this rehab. So I said, so what's the alternative? And that surgeon said to me, weight training.
Really?
Yeah. And so the way you check if you've got an ACL snap is you lie on your back, you put your feet flat on the floor, and you lift your knees up. And the surgeon then wobbles your quad and your calf the other way, sort of splits them, and basically it just goes everywhere because there's nothing holding the knee together. And that's exactly what happened. And so he said, what you've got to do is make sure that the muscles all around the knee are so strong that it compensates for the lack of this ligament. And so that was one thing that really accelerated my weight training when I realized I could do that. And now when I do ski, I ski with a titanium leg brace on, and that's more for psychological support, really. It doesn't really have that. Of course, it has a benefit, but my knee is so strong that it probably doesn't need the leg brace when I'm skiing. Right. But one issue is squash or tennis is very, very risky with it, because the sudden movements left and right of squash and tennis are different to the skiing movements, where it's more predictable, and that means that my ACL would just go, and it would cause further injuries to other ligaments around it. So that's why I don't play squash or tennis anymore.
And I'm wondering, actually, what is your... Because I mean, I've got 3 younger sisters, and going back to your point about school, because I remember even with weight training, the myth was, it's going to stunt your growth. You shouldn't touch weights before the age of 16, 17, 18 even. What is your advice? Like, people in school, like secondary school. This is what I really wanted to ask Angus as well. Like, what would your advice be for health and fitness then?
The exact opposite of what you just said. They should absolutely weight train. Probably any age from 14 onwards. It is essential for your bone density, your bone growth, to stimulate the bones. And you stimulate the bones by stimulating the tendons, and you stimulate the tendons by stimulating the muscles. So the muscles, tendons, bones are all connected together. This is why we talk about when you get older, you increase your bone density by weight training, and that prevents you from falling over when you're 80 or 90 because you've got stronger muscles, stronger bones. So in the same way, as a 14-year-old, as long as you do it progressively, as long as you do it with an initial consultation with a PT or a doctor and you're medically able to do it, the earlier you start weight training, the better, and it will absolutely not stunt your growth. The complete opposite. It can accelerate your growth. I mean, look at rugby players, right? They're not all tiny. So they've been weight training since they were like 14, some of them even younger. And I've got friends who are rugby players, and I just wish I'd had their muscle mass. A lot of people look at rugby players and say they must be genetically rugby players. But they're not. They've just been training their muscles since they were teenagers. And so they've got a reserve of muscle mass that just stays there, and the muscle memory grows. So for men, it's easier because of testosterone. For women, it's more complicated because women don't have the testosterone levels that men have. So one of the great myths, of course, in weight training is that lifting weights makes you bulky. Well, it only makes you bulky if you try really, really hard, you lift heavy weights repeatedly and heavier weights repeatedly, and you do it regularly, you allow proper recovery, proper rest, and you've got a decent reserve of testosterone. Women don't have enough testosterone to get bulky unless they work really, really hard. I see loads of women in my gym, in my office gym, and they're trying desperately to get bigger muscles, but it's very slow and very difficult. With men, it's much easier. And I think, obviously, men have more testosterone when they're in their teens and 20s than they do when they have them in the 50s and 60s. So it's easier to generate that reserve of muscle mass if you're younger. So I think both sexes, my daughter lifts weights, and she's 17. I think it's very, very important, and it's good for sport. It's good for mental health. I think you can't go wrong. And Angus and I did one podcast episode where we studied the myths, and I tried to work out where this myth that weight training stunts your growth came from. And I found out it came from a Japanese town and an American study on people in a Japanese town. And as with all of these studies, it had taken a conclusion and hadn't looked into all of the different factors that were affecting that community. And it was basically because of child labor. And the children were carrying hods of bricks around a construction site in Japan, whether it was last century or a long time ago. And those children were stunted in their growth. But the reason is they were malnourished. It was nothing to do with the weights they were carrying. Right. It was the fact that they were malnourished children, didn't have enough protein. So many things were wrong. But that they didn't isolate those things. They just said, oh, they're carrying weights, therefore must have stunted growth.
And that's really interesting. I mean, they don't say that in school. I just remember being told that, and that was kind of the rule. Like we even had to be approved by the PE teachers to go to the gym. I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned, and you've mentioned this on the podcast as well, like mentality, how it's affected kind of your mental performance, your performance at work. Could you talk more about this, like the benefits outside of like just physically?
Well, clearly, when you are under a barbell with 150 kilos across your shoulder, there's not much else you can think about. So it's a very good escape. And so you can if you're having a really stressful day at work, and again, Stefan talked about this from DWS on the podcast, it just provides an incredible escape, where during those minutes underneath the bench press, underneath the squat rack, your mind is on nothing else apart from don't drop the weights, make sure my form is correct. And so it's just a stress relief for a start. It's just total distraction. You can't possibly be distracted, otherwise something will go wrong with the weights. So that's the first thing. The second thing is obviously any sort of exercise releases endorphins. Endorphins are the happy drug of the body. So that's obviously going to help your mental health as well. Also, I found, and this has been a big surprise to me, is the community. You wouldn't expect that you go to the gym and it's a community. It's normally a solitary one-on-one thing. But quite often you go to the gym, you may have your headphones on, but then you're in the changing rooms, or you go to the sauna afterwards, or the steam room. And if you go to the gym at the same time each day or each week, you'll find the other people going to the same time or same day. So you end up building a community in the gym that you don't expect. So I've met so many people in Goldman Sachs because we all go to the gym at roughly the same time. So there's a community in Goldman. I've got a gym in West London that I go to. I've got a community there as well. So that's also incredibly good for your mental health. And then it also comes down to this intergenerational thing. So Angus and I, obviously different generations, we've got a great relationship. But also within the gym, I find I have relationships with people younger, older than me, because we've all got a common purpose of becoming the best version of ourselves. And everybody has been at the point of everybody else. Everyone has been the person who can't do a barbell back squat. Everyone has been the person that drops the weight when you're doing a bench press and have all of the plates falling off because they can't do the final rep. Everybody has this feeling that I've been there myself, and it creates an incredible camaraderie. And I think that's also very good for mental health. And then the final thing is the concept of delayed gratification. So if you're trying to grow your muscles, you can't do it overnight. You have to keep a record. How much did I lift last week? How much did I lift the week before? What's my PB on a barbell back squat? What's my PB on the overhead press? What's my PB on the bench? You're keeping data and records of your own progression, and that therefore is teaching your mind delayed gratification. So in the way that in the gym, you're progressively overloading your muscles, by going to the gym and keeping a record of your progress, you're progressively overloading your brain to learn delayed gratification, and that's very positive for your mental health.
So this is the road from zero to gym bro. These are all the
exactly.
I
like that, zero to gym bro. I haven't heard that before.
And I suppose just some other kind of on the spot questions, like what would your death row meal be if you had to choose?
I think it has to be a fillet steak with a little bit of salt and pepper on it, bit burnt on the outside, but medium rare inside. Maybe with some steamed spinach underneath it. And on the side, I may have some pepper sauce, not essential, but definitely on the side. Because the actual taste of a crusty steak straight off a flame grill is just phenomenal.
And you've spoken about cheat meals and how it's okay, the 80-20. What's your cheat meal? What does that look like? Do you have a certain...
I actually love... I hate the concept of cheat meals. It's not cheat meal. It's less macronutrient-dense food. So a cheat meal just means you're eating something that you may like, but it's pretty pointless for your body because it's got minimal amounts of protein in it and maybe excess calories in the forms of fats and carbs. But you have to remember, you can't absorb protein into your body efficiently unless you have carbohydrates with it. So you can't just have a total protein diet. You need to have a combination, right, of fats, proteins, and carbs, and obviously maximizing your minerals. But I love pain au raisin. So if I'm on at the weekend and I've just come back from the gym or I've got up, having a Americano and a pain au raisin, or sitting out in the Mediterranean, I love that.
And still on the topic of kind of culture and different foods, you've obviously worked in different locations. You've traveled to many different gyms, which I know you've talked about, your favorite ones. What are your favorite kind of cuisines or meals internationally?
I think Japanese food is incredible. I mean, I've lived in Japan very briefly, as well as Hong Kong and Singapore. And I think the sophistication of Japanese food, and also the fact that it is so pure, just a piece of raw fish from like there's a fish market called Tsukiji in Tokyo. It's very, very famous, probably the most famous fish market in the world. Unfortunately, the old one has closed down, and there's a new one now. But I remember queuing up at 2 a.m. one New Year in Japan on Christmas in Japan, to get the first tuna off the boat in the fish markets in a little tiny cafe. You just can't beat Japanese food. And it's so varied because you've got the teppanyaki as well, which is basically playing directly into the beef thing I've just described, yakitori. You obviously have, in addition to the sushi, all of the noodles and the soba. And then you have these incredible environments in Japan. The restaurants are just phenomenal. So I think Japanese food in aggregate would be my favorite. But you can't beat being in the Mediterranean, near the sea, on a summer's day, with a bit of fish or a bit of steak in the mountains. No question.
And do you have any other kind of go-to health and nutrition advice in terms of, supplements or kind of along these lines?
I think if you have a balanced diet of whole food, then that contains everything that you need in terms of vitamins. And to have additional supplements is not really necessary. The only thing that I do take is creatine. And our podcast is now sponsored by a company called Creolite, which puts creatine in strange little sort of gummies, which are quite cool. And so creatine is something your body naturally produces, and it can help with muscle growth. So if you have too much creatine, then you just excrete it out. I spoke to 3 different doctors about it before I started taking it, and I take that every day. So the only thing that I take is omega-3 oil, fish oil, and creatine. A lot of people take protein shakes. Protein shakes are necessary if you think you're going to miss your protein goals during the day. So if you're not going to have enough eggs, salmon, whatever for breakfast, you're not going to have enough protein at lunch, dinner, then a protein shake is a very good way of doing it. And protein powder is literally just dried milk, so it's not exactly complicated. And you can have a vegan version of it as well. And then you obviously mix it with milk. It's very good for rehydrating yourself post-gym. I only discovered this a few months ago when I was listening to some professional athletes talk about how they rehydrate themselves. I used to think you hydrated yourself by water. I realized hydrating by water alone is not rehydration. It just goes straight through you. So you need to have something else in the water. So you can put a bit of salt in it or something. That's very good. But a protein shake is a perfect way to rehydrate.
Okay, and could we talk about hip hop now, and also maybe starting? How did the name G-Dog come about? Like, is that related or completely?
It is related. So I first became a board member of East London Dance 10 years ago, which is a hip hop dance charity in East London in Stratford. It's founded in the 1980s, so it's been going for a long time. Very established, and I got to know, obviously, a lot of hip-hop dancers, and one of them in particular started calling me the G because I raised a lot of money for them. I did a sponsored 10K run, and my colleagues at Goldman and various others were very, very generous, and I raised a lot of money, so I became known as the G. And then Angus, one day in the gym, heard me saying I'm known as the G, and he said, "You may be the G, but you're also an animal." And then he said, "So from now on, you're going to be the G-Dog." and as Stefan Hoops pointed out from DWS, there's not enough G's in it. So he pointed out that Snoop Dogg has 2 G's at the end, whereas G-Dog only has 1. So there's a big debate now whether I should add an extra G. But anyway, so G-Dog came from that fusion of fitness and hip-hop. So that was the beginning of the hip-hop charity work, which I love. I'm just amazing charity. It does phenomenal things for youth mental health. Did incredible stuff during COVID for a lot of people in East London. And it's basically about getting people out of their normal environments, out of their family environments, off the streets to expel their energy and create energy via dance instead of just wandering on the streets of East London. And it's phenomenal. It creates a huge community atmosphere, and I love it. And through that, I got to know a hip-hop choreographer called Joseph Toonga, and we did a big performance in the Tower of London, and it would have been maybe 2015 or 16. And that was a huge success. And he then became quite well known in the dance community because of that, and was invited by a very famous choreographer called Wayne McGregor at the Royal Ballet to become the emerging choreographer in the Royal Ballet Covent Garden. So Christopher Wheeldon and Wayne McGregor are the two main choreographers of Royal Ballet. And Joseph, who is a black Cameroonian East Londoner who arrived in London at the age of 7, massive guy, he's great fun. He said to me, G-Dog, I want you to be on the board of my new charity, which I'm going to found, and all of our board meetings are going to take place at the Royal Opera House. And it's just so fun. So the guys on the stage door of the Royal Opera House know me now, and I go in there, and we have our board meetings there. And yeah, so I'm a banker that can hang around with hip-hop dancers and choreographers at the Royal Ballet, and it just takes me into a totally different mental space, and I love it.
And it's just so interesting because it's so unique. It's not very, common you come across it. And kind of what are the health benefits? Like, what is the link to, strength and weightlifting with?
Well, for a start, we should always encourage different parts of our brain to work. And if you just sit there doing finance stuff all the time, that's one part of your brain. But if you start doing arts and culture, it's a different part of your brain, right? So getting your brain to do different things, and again, progressively overloading your brain to learn different things, coming out of, talking about stock markets and finances all day, and then suddenly flipping to talk about the choreography at the Royal Ballet and how we're going to raise money is a completely different part of my brain. So that's one huge benefit of it. But also, I would say that it really benefits my interpersonal skills, right? Because you have much more to talk about. You're a more interesting person. I think we should all try to take ourselves out of our comfort zones and do different things. And so the fact that I go to the gym, I have a weight training podcast, the fact that I'm on the board of 2 hip-hop dance charities, and I work at Goldman Sachs, it just makes me a more interesting person when I'm speaking to my clients in business tense, when I'm speaking to my colleagues. And I think the guys at the Royal Ballet think it's really bizarre that I'm a banker, right? So it's all different people have different sort of perspectives on it.
And you're obviously you're a mentor as well, kind of for young people looking for mentors, both in the workplace but also outside. Whether it be in dance or the arts or even the gym. What's your advice for finding a mentor? And I know it's quite a specific personal thing to each person, but
exactly, it's all about symbiosis. I think you can't sort of go onto a sort of dating website for mentors. It just has to happen naturally. There'll be a lot of the people that I mentor now are people that I've bumped into because they're doing similar things to me. So, for example, one woman at Goldman Sachs reached out to me last year because she is a singer in a charity that is affiliated with East London Dance called UD. And she is a backing singer for Ray, the famous pop singer, via UD. And so she just messaged me in the office and said, "Hey, Graham, I see you're a board member of East London Dance. I'm a backing singer for Ray, and I also work in Goldman doing some sort of trading or something. Let's meet up and chat." And we end up having this great mentoring conversation because we had similar connections to the hip-hop community and singing and dancing. And so as a result of that, the mentor relationship began. So it's not that you cold call someone and say, "Be my mentor because I respect you." You have a connection first, and that connection then develops into a mentoring relationship. And it could be the same in the gym. You could just bump into someone in the gym, get on with them, and then say, "Let's have a coffee and just discuss my career."
And I suppose you're gaining a lot from them as well. As you said, it goes back to the interpersonal relationships.
Totally symbiotic. I mean, me and Angus have learned so much from each other. I've learned so much about self-confidence and so much about just doing it from Angus. I mean, I don't think I've told Stefan this, so if he listens to this podcast, he'll be amused, but I messaged Stefan Hoops, the chief executive of DWS, over LinkedIn because Angus told me to. So this was in April this year. I said to him, "This chief executive of DWS in Germany, biggest asset managers, just liked my LinkedIn post about my podcast." And Angus just said, "DM him now and tell him to come on the podcast." I'm like, "What? I don't know the guy. He's the chief executive of the biggest asset manager in Germany. He's running $1 trillion. I can't just DM him." He said, Graham, just do it. And so I messaged this guy at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday evening after a PT session with Angus. 5 o'clock the next morning, Stefan DMs me back on LinkedIn and says, Graham, this sounds fantastic. This is my media team. Get in touch with them and let's sort it out. I wouldn't have done it if Angus had not told me to do it. It's just amazing how sometimes you need that extra kick, and someone in their 20s just has that joie de vivre, I suppose.
Okay. Oh my gosh, we've talked about so much, and I have so much more I'd love to talk about. I mean, we're talking about, zero to gym bro. We're talking about nutrition, mentality. I suppose kind of wrapping up advice for Trinity students and all students listening. Could we talk about, any other advice for maintaining this balance? Because you've kind of talked about that now. It is important to be using both sides of the different brain. Do any other tips, or even just general advice you'd want listeners to this to hear?
First of all, listen to the Live for Life podcast.
Okay, we're putting the link to that. We're putting the link to that on this post.
That's the most important thing. Also, don't try to rush your career. Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. That's just such an important thing. I find people in their 20s just want to rush too fast, and you need to build a base to move forward. And if you rush too fast, you maybe are not embedding relationships which are going to help you in the future. And also, apart from my first job, I've never actually applied for a job. All my other jobs have come because of contacts. So building those relationships is really important. And I think one mistake I made in my early years at Goldman Sachs is underestimating the power of relationship building with colleagues. So I remember I used to go with clients on business trips to Hong Kong and not spend enough time with my colleagues in my Hong Kong office because I thought I should be with the client. But in actual fact, building those relationships with colleagues and nurturing those relationships is really, really important for you to broaden your knowledge, broaden your skills. And again, it's that symbiosis of relationships. So never stay in your niche. Never sit in a silo. Always try and think broadly where you are. So if you're at Trinity, think about this is like a world-class university with so many resources there. Are you maximizing your time at Trinity? Are you meeting all of the people that you could meet to build an incredible network for the future? You said that this podcast has got, 1,800 people or whatever that are various sort of alumni of Trinity. That's an incredible network. And you can reach out to them, but also within the university itself, there's people there on a day-to-day basis. This is the big problem with COVID, that people couldn't do that. But take advantage of the fact you are there, you are on site, you can meet people, you can talk to lecturers, you can talk to researchers, you can find out about other people's jobs, find out about what do they do before they became a lecturer, what are they planning to do in the future. People love, as we're discovering here, talking about themselves. So be a listener. That's one of the most important things in life, to learn to listen to other people speak and ask them questions, be inquisitive. And the more you understand other people, the more you'll find you're adding value to your own life.
And final question, because it's, on the topic of listening, let's also plug Lift for Life. I listen to it personally because it's informative. You can see it's really well researched. You and Angus know so much. It's also entertaining. I mean, you're funny. I mean, even yourself, you say G-Dog. I was not expecting that from a kind of Goldman Sachs managing director, but I'd love to know, maybe finally, why should people listen to the Lift for Life podcast? What would your... Yeah.
I think the Lift for Life podcast is more than its name suggests. It's about the relationship between two people. And you are a fly on the wall in that relationship listening to the podcast. And we have banter. The core of it, of course, is strength, fitness, longevity. But it's a 55-year-old and 26-year-old. My focus on longevity is probably bigger than Angus's. Angus is more focused on being jacked, being young, having a PT career, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a completely unusual combination of people. And I think we've discovered that over time, people it's almost like a soap opera. People buy into our relationship and see it changing. We've done it now for 1.5 years. We're on our 74th episode. We've only missed 2 weeks, and that was Christmas and New Year last year. This year, we're not going to miss those 2 weeks. We're going to carry on through. And so you listen to the Live for Life podcast because it's an education in human relationships, and the fitness and strength and longevity aspects are core, but not everything.
There we go. What better way to end it? G-Dog, thank you so much for the time. I hope we can do the next episode maybe in the gym.
Loved it. Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
You have been listening to the Trinity SMF podcast. You can find more of this podcast on our website, www.trinitysmf.com, and follow us on our social media to find out more about the podcast releases, upcoming events, and much more. Thank you again for listening, and stay tuned.